Come with us to El Salvador. We're going to talk about some blockchain startups that the state-run bank there is tapping to get this whole Bitcoin experiment off the ground. We're talking about Banco Hipotecario. That's the national commercial bank in El Salvador. It's working with a number of crypto startups. One that stood out to me was API3, which is a Chainlink competitor in the Oracle space, the Open Bank project, and Sovereign, which is a project trying to build DeFi on Bitcoin. So this is a national effort. It's interesting to see some established firms in the space get some contracts to provide sort of complementary services to Bitcoin as legal tender in El Salvador. What stands out to you, Naomi? Some interesting ones that they tap, some expected, maybe Sovereign, some maybe less expected. API 3 didn't really think about how oracles would interface with this effort from the country, but I guess that makes sense. What stands out to you from this crop of startups that is doing a little bit of work in El Salvador now?
Yeah, I mean, I think the more startups there, the better. I think that there's definitely some interesting things going on there. And if companies want to go in of their own accord and set up shop and see how they can integrate, that's awesome. In this story is kind of like, well, El Salvador state-owned bank is the one tapping these companies. So then I'm kind of like, oh, I'm not a big fan of all this government contract economy. It always seems like very under the table, behind closed doors. Like I love crypto for its kind of open ethos. But that being said, it's not anything against these startups. If they're companies that want to go in there and do good work, it doesn't mean that they're not going to. So I'm interested to see, what happens there. I also want to see other companies going in there and doing things like outside of the scope of the government mandates and the government contracts and all of that. But I mean, there seems to be a lot of excitement there. I have a lot of trouble with El Salvador, to be honest, because I'm trying to dig into information about what's going on there. I'm reaching out to a ton of people on the ground, getting conflicting reports about it. It's difficult to see what is hype for Bitcoin in the press, what is hype, in favor of the protests in the press that are trying to make that seem bigger than it is. It's been very difficult for me to separate the noise from the facts there. I don't know if you guys have had a similar experience. Will, what's been your experience kind of diving into the El Salvador operation?
Yeah, from my angle, it's somewhat been a little bit different information coming across the board. Like we've seen that there's been some reports of like ATMs being burnt on the ground because people are frustrated with it. But we also see that a lot of El Salvadorians are onboarding to the Chivo wallet, and that there's now more people using Bitcoin wallets in El Salvador than there are people with access to banks. So like you, there's a lot of conflicting images and information out there, a lot of noise. So I think we won't really know for a while. I do want to highlight what Zach is saying, though. There's some interesting companies in the mix here that they're trying to onboard into this Bitcoin ecosystem. API 3 is one that's really interesting. I'm also confused why an Oracle provider would get involved here. And just for background, what an Oracle provider does is it takes information on financial systems across the board, puts it into an API, which is basically like data streaming to your URL or your web page, allows you to access it. So if I want to see the price of Bitcoin, I can hook up an API for the price of Bitcoin and can stream it to my own personal website, and boom, there you go. I don't really know what their involvement is here because they do a lot of stuff with altcoins and with DeFi. They don't do a lot of stuff with Bitcoin. And the El Salvador story so far has been mostly a Bitcoin story. So it's interesting to see them on the ground, and we'll see what happens from here, I guess. Maybe there's more coins involved than we know of. Jen, I think I saw your hand go up, but might have been Naomi.
I think Naomi's went up first, and then I'll take it from there.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something quick to Will's point about the Oracle. That was the more optimistic news from this article, because oracles are really a more decentralized way to get information from the meat space into the blockchain realm. And so if they're relying on oracles rather than saying, well, our centralized government department is going to decide what the price is and feed that into the system or anything like that, that's a situation that I think is far worse. The fact that they're involving decentralized oracles, I think, is pretty exciting, because it suggests to me that maybe they get it more than I'd previously thought. So I'm interested to see what information they're actually gathering. This has been a primarily Bitcoin project, and now they're kind of feeding in a whole bunch of other data from the real world. But Jen, I'll throw to you.
Yeah, just to your point on the state-owned banks, I think in a place like El Salvador, um, bringing companies to partner with state-owned banks actually addresses that financial inclusion in a better way. I think maybe it might help educate people faster on the types of products that they might be offering, like altcoins and DeFi, and then maybe they can move on from the state-owned banks and move on to, you know, a more decentralized way of operating within the financial sector. And it just feels right for me. I feel like I know we don't want to always operate with governments, but it feels like the right way to introduce financial inclusion in a place like El Salvador. And then we can take gradual steps to the decentralization that we talk about. So I'm not that negative about it, but that's just usually my take on this show anyways.
So positive.
It's
So
cool to see. I mean,
positive.
you know, you have this experiment, right? Here's all this Bitcoin, and now all of a sudden you have actors within the economy being like, okay, cool. All these people have Bitcoin. I'm a bank. Let me tap some blockchain startups, and I'm going to offer complementary services to people who are all of a sudden in the crypto economy. And so if that means, you know, getting DeFi yield through Sovereign through your bank account, it could be a potentially really big deal for Salvadorans and others down the
Potentially
road.
promising.
Potentially promising. We're going to stamp it with potentially promising. We're going to keep an eye on it.